is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer after the Baltimore Ravens clinched their spot in the postseason with a 23-7 win over the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm back here in Baltimore on a rainy, now early morning Monday. Jonas, you are in Jacksonville. We are live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Could be listening to us after the fact on any of your podcast platforms, in which case give us a like or a thumbs up or a 5-star or a good review. But Jonas, a little bit of a Pyrrhic victory. It feels like the conversation we had after the Ravens blackout game in which they lost tight end Mark Andrews. In this one, they lose their emerging rookie running back, Keaton Mitchell. Ronnie Stanley also goes out with an injury. Ravens come up with a big win over the Jaguars, one of the better teams in the AFC, but you don't leave this game feeling phenomenal.
No, it's pretty incredible that this team is where it is right now, best in the AFC, heading into probably the game of the year, and look at all of the big-time players that they've either lost or have been without. Ronnie Stanley, in and out of the lineup. Marlon Humphrey, in and out of the lineup. J.K. Dobbins, lost for the year in week 1. Keaton Mitchell, the heir apparent, now likely sidelined for the season and maybe a little bit of next season with a knee injury. Odell, Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews, all these guys have missed significant time or will continue to miss significant time. And yet here the Ravens are, the overwhelming favorites in the AFC to get that number 1 seed. Obviously, a lot can change in these next 2 or 3 weeks, but when we looked at this Ravens team coming back from the bye, it was a 5-game gauntlet, and here they are, 2 games in, 2-0, and despite everything that may be falling apart inside, this is still a team that, just like you said, Paul, put away a really solid, if somewhat fading, Jaguars team by double digits. And I don't think any one of those Ravens that we talked to in the locker room would have acknowledged that this was anywhere close to their best game. So they got the job done. But after what we saw from Keaton and after what we've seen from so many guys on this roster who flashed but just have not been able to sustain it, it's obviously extremely disappointing.
Yeah, and it's impressive that the Ravens continue to weather the storm, and they've done it maybe better than any team in the AFC. And if that's the mark of a champion or of the best team in the conference, then the Ravens are doing that. Maybe they're not the most dominant team week in and week out, but they've been hit with their fair share number of injuries, their fair share of, ups and downs and offensive inconsistencies and bad luck. And they have weathered the storm through it all. But Jonas, we're going to get to the injury to Keaton Mitchell. We'll get to the offensive line struggles. We'll also take a bird's eye view look at the race for the number 1 seed in the AFC. But got to get to your word of the day. What is Jonas's word of the day after this win?
Not a word that is readily available in Merriam-Webster's dictionary. Urban Dictionary wasn't any help either. But despite all the disappointment with Keaton, despite the unevenness of some of this performance tonight, the Ravens clinched. So the word of the day is clinchmas. We are looking at 7 days away, a full week from Christmas Day. I will be in San Francisco for that, 3,000 miles away from my family.
You can't wait.
I can't wait. But the Ravens clinched, and there is something to be said that for as competitive as this AFC was pegged to be, the Ravens are the first team into the pool. They are the first team to get that playoff ticket. We can speculate about what this means for them in the long term, about that number 1 seed, about who they might get in that potential, 4 or 5 matchup. Looking at you, Joe Flacco. But there is, like I said, there should be overwhelming pride from this Ravens coaching staff, from this Ravens roster, from this Ravens fan base about the fact that all of the projections and New York Times playoff odd calculating and everything that we do to kind of whittle away the hours between games, at least as it pertains to getting into the playoffs, we don't have to worry about that anymore because the Ravens are in. You can't take that away from them. They're, overwhelming favorites to get a top 4 seed. Obviously, Cleveland is still nipping at their heels, but Some guys on this Ravens roster knew that there was a playoff berth at stake. Some guys like Lamar Jackson did not, which just goes to show how locked in and focused this team has been on a week-to-week, day-to-day basis.
Let's talk about the injury to Keaton Mitchell, because before we get into the nitty-gritty notes from this game, I think that is the overarching storyline. He goes down with that knee injury after the game. Coach John Harbaugh says it is season ending. It's frustrating because he was just starting to take control as the Ravens' top back. You know, he was maybe going to get his first double-digit carry game of the season. He had not yet had that. I think he finished with 9 in this game. He was averaging over 8 yards per carry. He was emerging as one of the Ravens' most integral offensive pieces. And the thunder and lightning combination that he had with Gus Edwards, who has been struggling, another not so great game for Gus Edwards today, 16 carries for 58 yards. He did have a touchdown. But to have the lightning aspect is what makes the combination so good. And for Keaton Mitchell to go down in this game, you just worry about the Ravens in a playoff matchup not having that extra weapon at their disposal. They're already without Mark Andrews, who is, one of the best tight ends in the NFL. And now you lose your rookie, exciting, speedy running back in Keaton Mitchell. And maybe it won't hurt them over the final 3 weeks of the season. Maybe they'll still be able to get the number 1 seed easily without him. But in a playoff matchup, Todd Monken is going to want all the tools at his disposal, and he will not have Keaton Mitchell.
Just a little bit of a drop off in the game breaking ability from Keaton Mitchell to Melvin Gordon, who it sounds like is going to be RB3. But yeah, I mean, you look at Keaton's stat line from tonight: 9 carries, 73 yards, 8.1 yards per carry. You look at some of the advanced rushing stats. He finished with 39 rushing yards over expectation. So if I do the math correctly, he should have only had 9 carries for 44 yards, something like that. But I don't know how many players there are, not just in the Ravens, but in the NFL at large, who could have made the cutback that he did against the grain on that kind of pitch out on the right side, cut back, got the nice little shoulder from Lamar. He's taking care of business with that one. Wasn't going to, imperil himself with a huge takeout block on that. But you lose that improvisational ability, that home run hitter that the Ravens, until Keaton stepped up to the plate for this year, just lacked. And, Gus Edwards finished strong. Justice Hill finished strong. But if the Ravens are going to see these light boxes and they are going to have to, take the dare from these teams to run it up the middle, because teams are more concerned about Zay Flowers, Odell, Bateman, likely, then the Ravens are going to have to punish teams. And I don't know how confident you can feel in Gus Edwards and Justice Hill doing that. Although maybe I'm kind of speaking out of two sides of my mouth here, because they did just run for close to 250 yards against a top 3 Jaguars run defense. So for as much uncertainty about what this rushing game might look like, there's a lot to build on from this one, despite the loss of Keaton Mitchell.
Yeah, Lamar, though, did finish as the Ravens' leading rusher, as the game's leading rusher. Both quarterbacks in this game were their team's leading rusher. Lamar finished 12 carries, 97 yards. He was he was getting Chris Collinsworth to make all kinds of strange noises on the broadcast.
Let's hear you do it, Paul.
That's the go-to for Chris Collinsworth.
That's a pretty good one.
Thank you. And I've practiced a lot, because anytime he doesn't have anything to add, or he just is reacting, he's just throwing all kinds of noises into the microphone. He was losing his mind over one Kyle Hamilton's play, which we'll get to, because Kyle Hamilton is your favorite broadcaster's favorite safety. Every broadcaster just loves to heap praise on this guy. But also Lamar Jackson, he is in that kind of realm this year, has gotten back into that realm of Patrick Mahomes, where anytime he does anything, even if it's a routine play, the broadcasters will just gush and gush over him. But he was terrific today in the pocket. The numbers were not phenomenal through the air, 14 of 24, only 171 yards, that kind of ugly telegraphed interception that he had. But other than that, I mean, he was making things happen on the ground, in the pocket, just weaving out of tacklers' arms. He was keeping the Ravens' run game alive, especially after Keaton Mitchell went out. And when he is playing like this, when he is as magical as he is, it's very hard to defend.
Not a lot of routine plays for him in the pocket, though, Paul. And I think that would have been the big takeaway for me if this had come down to the wire or if the Ravens had lost. I just looked this up before we hopped on. Average time to throw tonight of 3.8 seconds. That was the second longest average time to throw of his career.
He was really holding on to it.
Yeah. If you remember that 2021 game against Detroit, ended with the incredible Justin Tucker kick. That was another game where he was just constantly on the move, constantly scrambling. And I thought we would see a performance more in line with his performance against the Rams, because this was a Jaguars defense that was not especially stout in the back end. And it came into this game missing probably its top two players, Andre Sisco, their safety, and then Tyson Campbell, their cornerback. Joe Flacco lit them up for 300 plus yards. Joe Flacco, also had some fumbles or not fumbles, turnovers, some bad plays in that one. And I thought that with how extremely impressive the Ravens receivers, the wide receivers in particular, looked last week against the Rams, we would see a performance that would build on that. And we just didn't. I mean, most of Lamar's damage, it felt like, aside from when he got into the red zone and he was really throwing in rhythm, felt like it happened out of structure. And considering the defenses that this team is going to have to beat in the playoffs, it was a little disappointing that we couldn't get a second, strong performance from Lamar as a drop back passer, go from 1 to 2, get rid of the ball. But it's Lamar. He's unconventional. He does things his own way. No diminishment in support for his MVP candidacy from anyone in that Ravens locker room. It's going to be a really fascinating week of sports talk radio this week with Brock Purdy and Lamar, and their varying cases for MVP, considering they go about it two extremely different ways. But there's no one like Lamar as a run game threat, and that was what the Ravens needed in the first half, and definitely what they leaned on in the second.
And Dak Prescott had just started to enter that MVP conversation and then sort of laid an egg today against the
Exited the chat.
Yeah. Yep. He said, thank you very much for your consideration. I'm withdrawing my candidacy. Yeah. Interesting performance from Lamar. Also, the wide receivers today, after the great game that they had last week, like you said, Jonas, not nearly the same production this week. It was Isaiah Likely who was the unlikely hero in this one in terms of production offensively. 5 catches for 70 yards, an incredible 26-yard leaping catch at the end of the third quarter over 2 defenders, just a big man move, and a great trust by Lamar Jackson, as you tweeted at Jonas_Shaffer. Lamar just saying, F it. He's down there somewhere. Isaiah Likely's down there somewhere, and he was. And Zay Flowers and OBJ on the other side finished with a catch each and combined for just 17 receiving yards. Zay didn't have a target in the entire first half. His first target came with 4 minutes left in the third quarter. Very strange performance from the Ravens offense in terms of where the targets were distributed.
This was a very disappointing battle of the Zays. We thought that in the first ever matchup of 2 Zays, at least according to the Pro Football Reference, we would get ourselves a barn burner, but no. I thought for sure that with all of the pre-snap motion that Zay Flowers does, he would have gotten at least 1 touch today on an end around, but he didn't, and Lamar couldn't find him downfield. Zay Jones definitely got the better of that matchup. 5 catches for 59 yards, including that long catch, beating Brandon Stevens just before halftime. So 2 steps forward, 1 step back, I guess, for this Ravens passing group. They're going to need more against San Francisco. Good thing they have another day to kind of work out the kinks and find out exactly what went wrong, because that pass rush is not going to be as forgiving as the Jaguars pass rush today, which was, they had a good game, but I think if Lamar expects to have the same kind of magic, making people miss, shaking off guys like he did tonight, he might be in for some trouble, because that 49ers pass rush is legit, and the coverage is even more airtight than the Jaguars. So, Ravens got out of here with a win, and a comfortable win at that. But I would have liked to have seen more from that group. And like I said, build on that Rams game.
Yeah, how concerned were you with the offensive line in this one? Because I think there was some fatalism from some fans on social media based on the performances of Ronnie Stanley and Morgan Moses. I mean, they're going up against Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, who are two good pass rushers, but Stanley just seemed to be struggling with getting any kind of anchoring on his knee. He allowed a first half sack. He had a holding penalty, and then he left the game in the concussion protocol. They both of these two tackles received offensive series off, like we had seen in the past, just to get them off their feet. It can really kill an offensive drive and an offensive possession when you don't have your two starting tackles out there. And the consistent play of the two of them is going to be hugely important for this team in the playoffs. How concerned were you when you watching those two tonight?
Yeah, Josh Allen, I assume that the bulk of these were lining up against left tackle. And again, it's tough to say, especially now, how many of these were against Ronnie versus Patrick McCarry. I think Daniel Fa'alele got a little bit of time there at left tackle, but 7 quarterback pressures on 24 pass rushes. So a 29.2 quarterback pressure rate. That is pretty dang high. That is not what you want to see with Joey Bosa, waiting for the Ravens in San Francisco next week, with Chase Young waiting for the Ravens in San Francisco next week. Like you said, it was another trying night for Ronnie in terms of anchoring. I thought he had some good drives where that left side was completely unbothered, but I think you're starting to see teams not really bothering just with speed rushes. They're just going to try to knock him back into the pocket. And Josh Allen is a big, strong, fast dude, and he was able to do that a couple times today. So predictably, I think Ronnie Stanley was trending on Twitter within about 5 minutes of game time. I imagine he's probably still trending right now, considering just how things happened there, and him leaving the game in concussion protocol. So, yeah, I mean, we thought that this tackle group, if it held together, would be a strength of that offensive line. If you think back to how well it was performing at the end of last season, when Ronnie was in good shape, Morgan Moses was in great shape. But if Lamar doesn't feel comfortable back there, then he's not going to feel comfortable to rip it. And we're going to have to see him improvise like we did tonight. So, as with the wide receivers, kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah. And on the defensive side of the ball, another injury to the Ravens secondary, Marcus Williams. He's been so healthy throughout the course of his career, and then he got to this season and he just can't seem to stay healthy. You tweeted out the video of the tackle, which was a phenomenal, point-saving tackle at the end of the first half on a total bungle by the Jaguars offense. I mean, between the 2 missed field goals in the first half and then the curious decision to, with no timeouts and 15 seconds left, to throw short of the end zone and inbounds and allow the clock to run down when they could have had at least 3 points. But a great tackle, but Marcus Williams ended up paying for it because he left the game with a groin injury, and John Harbaugh provided an update on him post-game. What did Harb say about him?
Yeah, Harb said he was day-to-day, which could be a little bit of gamesmanship, just wanting to keep San Francisco on their toes. John's been pretty honest and forthright about his injuries, so about the Ravens' injuries this year. So I would say that's probably pretty close to the truth, but obviously, it is to the Ravens' benefit if San Francisco is worried about preparing for Marcus Williams as opposed to preparing for everyone else on that roster. Didn't get a chance to see him post-game in the locker room. Didn't really get a chance to see him on the far sideline just because of how far we are from the Ravens and their benches and where they were sitting. But the defense did more than a good job back there. You would like to have Kyle Hamilton be that box safety, be that nickelback with how San Francisco is going to probably attack the Ravens next week. You would much rather have a guy like him in the box as opposed to Arthur Maulet, just because of what he gives you as a blitzer, as a run defender, as a screen destroyer. So that's going to be something that the Ravens are going to have to consider if Marcus Williams indeed takes a little bit longer to recover than they would like. But, it's not a season ender. If it is day to day, then, you just want to get him back to health, get him back to full strength. It's not a pec injury, which, is a good sign considering how much he's already dealt with his upper body this year. So, it could be worse, but obviously the Ravens need Marcus Williams healthy if they really want to be this kind of Death Star defense that we think they can be, especially going into that 49ers game.
And the pass rush up front for the Ravens, I thought took a while to get going in this game. They only ended up with 1 sack, which was, guess who, Justin Madubuike. 12 on the season, 11 straight games with at least half a sack. They weren't really getting up into Trevor Lawrence's face too much, but I thought the run defense was incredibly stout for the Ravens tonight. Just 75 rushing yards for the Jaguars on the day. Obviously, the defense pitches that first half shutout. They get a little bit lucky. The fact that, the missed field goals, the bad decision-making by the Jaguars down the stretch in the first half. But, not the banner day for the pass rush, but I thought they did enough. And the fact that they were able to stop the Jaguars on the ground helped a lot.
Justin Madubuike keeps on doing it, man. 6 quarterback pressures today. That was by far the most on the Ravens. Clowney had 4. Adafe had 3. He keeps on doing it. To quote Jess Rebeck from The Athletic, he just keeps on ringing that cash register. Every game he makes the doubters look a little bit more foolish. I think he's elevated his game from where he was at the start of the year, where he was kind of having to rely on, not having to rely, but getting a lot of production from some of the pass rush games that the Ravens were setting up for him, where he's coming off those pick screens and he's just getting to the quarterback free, unabated. But he was huge today. He had that strip sack that led to a Ravens field goal. He was a menace inside against a pretty overmatched Jaguars interior, and he's going to have to be huge and healthy for this Ravens team moving forward, because the edge rush group has fallen off a little bit from where it was maybe a month ago or so. Adafe is not getting home as often as he was. Kyle Van Noy is kind of only here in bits and pieces. Obviously, you trust Mike McDonald to be able to draw up those bespoke blitzes to get the guys home when they need to, especially on those critical third downs. The Ravens were really impressive on third down defense today. But if Madubuike is going to be the ringleader of that pass rush, then he's earned it. I don't know how many interior defensive linemen are playing better than him right now.
No, it's not many. I mean, I think he leads all interior defensive linemen in terms of sack production. And like you said, Jadeveon Clowney, he's had a couple sacks over his last couple games, but now I think 2 games in a row, he has been held without a sack. So you're starting to see a little bit of a drop off in production from him and Adafe Owe. In terms of defensive backs, other than we mentioned Kyle Hamilton, the phenomenal game that he had, continuing his phenomenal season in a game that we weren't even positive he was going to play in, and he's just flying around all over the field. I love how you tweeted that one of these days opposing offenses will realize that they probably should not throw screens to Kyle Hamilton's side of the field. But until they figure that out, the Ravens will continue to benefit from that. And then Arthur Maulet got absolutely burned on, looked like a bag mix-up. He probably bit on the shallow route and got beat over top on a long touchdown, 65-yard touchdown by Jamal Agnew. But they were doing pretty well in terms of the defensive backs on Zay Jones, on Calvin Ridley. Marlon Humphrey was playing in this game. Brandon Stevens played pretty well. He drew kind of a weak pass interference, but I thought the defensive backs and particularly the cornerbacks played pretty well today.
Yeah, Trevor Lawrence under 60%. That is yeoman's work from the pass defense, considering the pass rush wasn't as overwhelming as it needed to be. And, Trevor Lawrence is going to get the ball out quickly. You know that. You know that you're probably going to have to make a play on the ball. And we saw Brandon Stevens do a good job. Obviously that he's going to want that long completion back just before halftime. But I thought he was really productive. Marlon Humphrey was, I thought, really, really special. We're going to have to ask John Harbaugh on Monday and figure out exactly what went wrong on that, like you said, coverage bust, or at least what looked like a coverage bust on that 65-yard touchdown. But if you compare a misplay like that to what was the bane of the Ravens' existence last year, especially early, it felt like those long 50-plus yard touchdowns were happening every other week. And now you really have to scratch your head and think, man, when was the last time a big play was perpetrated against this defense like that one? And I can't think of anyone really.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that there have been some long runs, there have been some nice cash and runs too, but it has been few and far between these just big shot plays that completely changes the momentum of a game. And that's a credit to the Ravens and their communication and the Mike McDonald and all the coaching that has gone on with this, because that was a play that could have, swung this game in the Jaguars' favor, and it didn't. The Ravens bowed up on defense. They got going on offense, and that 65-yard touchdown is basically just a footnote in what was another really memorable Ravens win.
Yeah, I mean, it was the lack of the explosive play for the Jaguars, I thought, that kind of killed them in this game. And it was the Ravens defense being able to hold them without that explosive play. In terms of the playoff odds, Ravens have a 100% chance now of making the playoffs.
That checks out, yeah.
That checks out. In terms of the number one seed, the Dolphins won today convincingly. The Chiefs won today less convincingly. But both those teams are still, I believe, in the running for the number one seed. But the Ravens, with their win today, hold a commanding 75% chance of taking the coveted number one seed and the only bye in the AFC. So a big win in terms of seeding for the Ravens going forward, especially considering they're facing the Niners on Christmas Day in San Francisco in a week.
And if you look at this AFC picture, there are 5, I guess you would call, pretty close to locks. You got the Dolphins, 98% to make the playoffs. Bills, 71%. Ravens are obviously in. Browns, with their win today, 88%. Jaguars, 75%. So it's going to have to be someone else. Probably not the Bengals. Falling to 35%. Might be between the Texans and the Colts, both around 55%. Chiefs, shouldn't overlook them. They're at 99%. So I guess that is 6 teams. So I guess we are kind of pretty solidly, figuring out exactly who's going to be in this playoff mix. A lot can happen, and I'm sure a lot will happen over the next 3 weeks. But to be 75% is a good thing. Not breaking any news right now, but next week is important, but it is not going to decide the Ravens' AFC playoff fate. Just poking around right now, they could lose to the 49ers and their first round odds fall only 6% to a nice 69%. What really matters are those AFC games. You beat the Dolphins, you bump it up to 93%. You beat the Steelers after that, so you finish this year 2-1. You're a virtual lock, 100% to make the playoffs. So for as much as we will hype and the assembled NFL media will hype this Ravens 49ers game, and deservedly so, because it is the AFC's best team against the NFC's best team, really, it is not of paramount importance to the Ravens if they want to have the easiest path to the AFC championship game as possible.
It is of paramount importance to Ravens fans who want to enjoy their Christmas. However, because it is on Christmas Day night, or perhaps they could just turn in early and not worry about the game and just focus on the family around the holidays. Jonas, you're going to be at never. You're going to be away from your family at that game in a week's time. But before that, we got to preview that game sometime this week. We will have another episode for you. Please like, review, subscribe, rate, comment, all that good stuff. We are live for our podcast now on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, in addition to posting after the fact on all your favorite podcast platforms. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. I am at Paul Mancano. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll have another episode for you later this week. Ravens get the win 23-7 over the Jaguars. They punch their ticket to the postseason.
Merry Clinchmas.